Heading up to Mackinac next week, what the state's leaders will be talking about. Detroit Regional Chamber CEO Sandy Baruah is with us at the desk. Plus, is Michigan doing enough to keep businesses here? Also, Melissa Gilbert is out, and Democrats are now scrambling for an 8th Congressional District candidate. And our cops dance better than your cops. Stay put. Nolan and Stephen are here. MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015. It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you are joining us. We are rolling into the holiday weekend, and for a lot of the state's lawmakers, business leaders, and educators, they'll be packing their bags for the annual trek up north next week for the Detroit Regional Chamber's Mackinac Policy Conference. The state's biggest decision makers are all in one place, focusing on Michigan's future and tackling some of the toughest issues that we are facing. That is where we are starting tonight with our contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press, and back here on MiWeek, the CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Baruah. Sandy, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Christy. Great
All
to
right.
be back.
Well, you know what? We are heading up for the Mackinac Policy Conference next week. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what we can expect to hear on the official agenda before we start talking about what I think is on the not official agenda.
Right, there's the agenda and there's the agenda, right? So every year our CEO committee picks 3 issues to focus on because you can only do so many things and we don't want to repeat agenda items year after year. So this year, urban education, primarily funding models. We're looking at funding models and we're obviously going to be talking about DPS. You can't avoid it, a huge issue. Secondly, we're going to be talking about investing in our future. We have key industries in this state that if we don't protect and grow, we're going to have a real challenge. That's defense, that's mobility, that's IT, it's healthcare, and we need to focus on those industries to make sure that they're successful, so that's going to be on the agenda. And the last is entrepreneurship, and we're doing some fun things, some really fun things around entrepreneurship, including the Mackinac Policy Conference's first ever pitch competition, and we're bringing in Damon John from Shark Tank.
Oh, nice. So how's that going to work?
Hopefully well.
So like the show.
So what we've done is that working with our partners in the west side of the state, they went through a competition on the west side of the state to pick one company, one entrepreneur company to send up to the Mackinac Policy Conference. They picked a company called Fathom that makes underwater drones. We did a thing at the Detroit Policy Conference, which you guys were at, and we went through a similar process, a pitch competition, and we picked here in Detroit a company called Detroit Ento that makes edible bugs.
What's that say about different cultures on the 2 sides of the state? You got underwater drones, and you got crickets over here.
So the edible bug thing is fascinating because when you look at how much farmland we're going to need to feed the growing planet, we don't have enough farmland. And so getting protein, and the thing with these bugs is that bugs are, some bugs, not all bugs, are an incredible source of protein. So it's an incredibly cost-effective way of protein. Underwater drones, obviously, incredibly cool technology. So they're both kind of game-changing technologies. So Damon John, along with a couple celebrity judges, including Paul W. Smith, will pick the winner.
Oh, that'll be great.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Mackinac has become known for the place where the legislature and the governor try to work out all the kinks in the
grand bargain,
budget,
great example.
before they break for summer. There was some talk that the House might stay behind this year. I think they've walked that back just a little. We've got some big issues hanging out there, big policy issues hanging out there in the legislature. Do you expect that this year those things, even though they're not on the agenda necessarily, will become sort of the focal point of
Well, I think DPS is going to be on the agenda and on the agenda.
And on the agenda,
exactly,
right.
to Christy's point. So we're going to have DPS on stage. We're going to be talking about funding models on stage. But I'm really hopeful that the House of Representatives is still going to make it up there. In fact, last I heard, the Speaker, who I've got a lot of respect for, is hoping to wrap up session sometime Thursday, so they can get their Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, and for Friday's session, which would be fantastic. And it is an opportunity for the legislators to hear directly from the business community from all parts of the state in terms of what they're thinking. And it's also an opportunity to talk to House members, Senate members, and the governor's team, in a unique environment. I mean, we're not in formal offices. Everyone's without a tie. You're standing on the front porch of the Grand Hotel. It's a different vibe.
Well, I mean, they may get this school deal done by Thursday when they come up. So how does that change the dynamic?
Well, your paper, Ingrid, who's done some amazing reporting on this, is reporting that there's potentially a deal for the $500 million, to kind of handle the debt issue. If that's the case, that's wonderful.
Plus $100 million for startup.
Right, and so, but there's still some issues in terms of how much is really needed for the startup for the new DPS to be successful. And the other issue is the Detroit Education Commission. How are we going to have a system like other cities that have a successful charter and public school community? How are we going to be able to regulate that?
But at this moment, the DEC is gone. They've agreed to set it aside for now. So is there another model that you think that the business community could help come up with to accomplish the same thing without being so frightening to charters?
Well, again, we're not trying to, first of all, the Detroit Regional Chamber, we're incredibly supportive of charters. We're one of the leading organizations that were advocating for charters, and we still advocate for a robust charter system. It's just that we have looked at what is our success in Detroit in particular about the success of charter schools versus other cities across the country, in many cities which I have lived in. And the key element that we find is that there is some sort of entity that's controlling opening and closings and monitoring the success and the performance of schools. So does it have to look exactly like the DEC? No, we're certainly open to other things, but it needs to have some sort of system that ensures that bad schools, either public or charter, can't get replicated, and that we don't have an overabundance of schools in some part of the city and a dearth of schools in other parts of the city. Right now, we don't have that in Detroit, and we're paying a price for it.
And we're the only city, by the way, that does it that way.
Right.
And you can't go anywhere else and find this sort of wild
But
west.
whether that's right or wrong, they're not going to pass the legislation, it looks like, with that in it. So that's likely an issue for another day to settle.
Go ahead, Sandy. If you
I was just going to say,
listen,
the business community, a lot of them who are going to be up at Mackinac support something like the DEC. I mean, there's probably different versions of it. But, one of the reasons why many of the best performing national charter organizations have not come to the city of Detroit is because there isn't this regulatory scheme. And it is the Wild West, as Stephen rightly points out. And that has kind of prevented some of those organizations from coming into town.
We've been covering the Detroit Public Television has now been streaming. I think it's going on our 6th year, the Mackinac Policy Conference. So people are able to see actually what goes on up there, because some of the criticism is, well, what do they actually do up there at the Grand Hotel? But I think it's also interesting because we've been able to see where the state has been kind of coming up and down and some of the highs and lows. Sandy, in terms of business and where we are in the state of Michigan in attracting business and growing business, how would you say that we're doing right now, where we are at this time this year?
We're doing phenomenally better than we were a handful of years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Phenomenally better. One, businesses had a do not visit. Michigan had a do not visit reputation with international and domestic businesses. Our tax structure was ununderstandable and expensive. Our regulatory scheme was not good. I mean, people were scared of unions. All that has fundamentally changed. So we have done a good job attracting, and you look at our unemployment rate across the state, we are now at or below the national average as a state. I mean, that's phenomenal. Who would have thought that would have happened in Michigan 10 years ago or during the dark days days of the Great Recession. So that has gone phenomenally well. We do have issues that we need to address. Education is one of the primary ones we need to address. Funding for higher ed is another one, and basic infrastructure. I mean, Flint obviously is the red flashing light, but we still have a roads issue. We have a bridges issue.
But Sandy, there were two announcements this past week that signaled to me that things have fundamentally changed in Michigan. One is the new parts plant that's going to be built in Detroit. That's a major manufacturing facility.
Flexengate.
Flexengate. And
Saeed Khan.
And right, and I can remember just a few years ago, the popular wisdom was Detroit would never get another major manufacturing facility.
Right.
It would never get another mega plant. And I mean, this is a big plant, and it promises to get bigger. And then
And it's not the last one that's coming. There's other things in the works.
I mean, so that has changed that dynamic in just a very short period. Plus, you had Google saying, we're going to bring a self-driving car system here instead of Silicon Valley. And I think it's one of the things people were waiting to see, how we were going to hang on to that piece of the business here in Detroit.
So there's two challenges there. So one, I mean, Michigan and the Detroit region in particular, we have to own that next generation of mobility, which is moving our automotive business from a product-based business to a service-based business and doing this V to V, V to I. We need to own that. If we don't own that, we're in trouble. That's kind of the Google piece. The other piece, which is what's great about Flexengate and what the big three are doing, or what places like American Axle are doing, is that we need more jobs for Detroiters who may not have the technical skills that Google is looking for. So we need to do both things simultaneously, and Mike Duggan gets that. And he's working on both.
Mike Duggan will be a front and center at the conference as well. What other, I guess, little storylines do you expect to come out? A lot of talk about politics, presidential and statewide as well.
Well, I think the 2016 presidential race might increase our bar tab a little bit, just because I think people are so frustrated with how the 2016 election is going to go. We're going to do something interesting and something we've never tried before. We're doing a kind of a meet the press style or flashpoint style on-stage interview. So we've got Soledad O'Brien and Harold Ford, and they're going to be joined by, two members of Congress, then two business leaders, and then two political pundits, just talking about national political issues and how it relates to Michigan. So that's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to be really popular. But again, I think our bar tab's going to be high this year.
And it's that'll be probably because of Stephen. Go ahead. Last question for you. Go ahead.
Sandy, I had a conversation with Carrie Moss, who's the executive director of the ACLU, in an interview that's going to air next week. She's pretty critical of the absence of Flint in the sort of formal agenda of the conference. You do have some pieces in there. Mona Hanna-Attisha will speak briefly, but talk about why not make Flint, which is the story that come out of Michigan so far this year, why not make it more of a centerpiece of this conference, given the many different policy debates and issues that led to it and that will have to be dealt with on the back end?
Yeah, I'm surprised Carrie's concerned about it. And first of all, she never expressed any concern to us, so I'm happy to talk to her about it. But we think we're doing a really good job of talking about Flint. So we're doing several things around Flint. One, as you mentioned, Dr. Mona is center stage. We're doing an entire fundraising campaign around the Child Health and Development Fund, both a presence in the hotel and I can't. Just look for a major on-stage presence about fundraising. Dan Kilde's on stage participating. He's going to be talking about infrastructure issues. So we have got a whole kind of Flint theme that's going to run all throughout the conference. I was delighted that Mayor Weaver decided to come to the conference, and she'll be there. So we've got Flint there. Now, if people are looking for us to kind of re-adjudicate the Flint issue and try to who's to blame, we're not going to play that game.
Well, but even beyond that, the question of investment in cities or the disinvestment in cities, the question of disinvestment in infrastructure, the things that made Flint possible and really caused it. Debate over the emergency manager law. The governor himself says we probably ought to go look back and adjust it to accommodate a little more democratic voice, things like that. Why not make those things sort of, again, centerpieces of the conference?
Well, some of those things that you mentioned, I think, are going to be covered. I mean, that's why Dan Kilde's on stage, and I think Dan's going to hit on all those issues. The debate over the emergency manager law. You're right, that's not on the agenda. We only have so much time and room, and our agenda gets set pretty early, and so the whole idea of education and funding, which we knew was going to be an issue, investing in our future in those critical industries, and entrepreneurship. Those are themes that we set in early. So, we've woven Flint through.
All right. Well, Sandy, we look forward to seeing you up on Mackinac Island next week, as always, and thanks so much for joining us on MiWeek.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And just wrapping up our conversation about Mackinac Island, I'm going to be interested to see the role that the governor plays because he's kept a very low profile since Flint. It's a very different year for him, Nolan, than it has been in years past with Mackinac Policy Conference.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see. He always has been very comfortable interacting socially on the porch and in the parlor. You always had access to him throughout these days. It'll be interesting to see if he's a little gun shy now. He has been, taking a lot of heat in public, and there's been a lot of, sort of abuse directed at him in public. This is a friendlier crowd, but you never know, who's going to slip on or in, and how ugly that might get.
Well, it's sort of a friendlier crime. I mean, you still got the legislature up there, and they're not. They ain't that friendly right now.
They're not going to be shouting.
I don't think anybody up on Mackinac will be shouting at him.
But that's what he's gone through.
But this used to be. I mean, the first few years that he was governor, it was like this was his conference.
It was a victory lap.
Yeah, right. And he would roll out big ideas or put the final touches on big ideas, big projects, and things like that. This will be different, I think, because of the change in tenor around this administration that Flint has affected.
Yeah.
Sandy mentioned, the whole infrastructure discussion. Yeah. You asked him about it. Well, he just got a Flint funding deal passed that didn't include that $160 million to begin the process of addressing Michigan's infrastructure. So he's been disappointed so far this year on his agenda. Yeah.
All right. Well, make sure you join us up on Mackinac Island next week. We're going to be streaming all of the sessions live. Plus, you can see MiWeek 3 times next week. We're going to bring you shows from Mackinac next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night at 7:30 p.m. Very exciting. All right. Hey, rumblings that other states are trying to entice Dow Chemical to move workers and operations from Midland is leading to a bigger conversation across the state about how we keep businesses here and how we attract businesses. Are we investing enough? Are we doing it in the right way? I mean, do we have enough funding in place, Nolan, for those like the MEDC to be able to bring in those businesses?
Well, that's always a good question. I don't think you can buy business. I don't think you can buy jobs. You've got to make the climate here right for all businesses. And one of the things, I'm moderating a panel Thursday on the defense industry, and you've got a lot of other states looking at Michigan's defense industry, particularly TACOM, which is based in Warren, and saying, hey, we would like that here. And, they've got their congressional district organized to compete for those defense dollars. We've lost a lot of clout in Congress, and there is some worry, that we've got to step up to protect that defense industry. And, it's across the board, other industries as well.
And if you take a look, if Midland lost a part of Dow, that would have a huge impact.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just Midland. Go around the state. The last decade and a half, we've seen towns absolutely devastated when the one big company that has existed there for really long periods of time goes away.
So where's the push to be able to hang on to companies? Is it more incentives? And no one likes the word incentives.
So my view of it is again, climate. I think it has to do not just with taxes and regulation, though, but with investment. I mean, businesses like states that invest in education. They like states that invest in infrastructure and roads and things like that. All of the things that we're doing really poorly at right now, as a matter of fact, higher ed, things like that, where we're lagging behind other states. Those are the things that put us at a competitive disadvantage when companies either look at where they want to go or are here and maybe look at states that are doing better.
And you've got to help a place like Midland be competitive for young talent. Yeah, because we're not producing enough young talent here for that industry or other industries. And you've got to make sure that young talent will look at Midland and say, yeah, I could live here. Now, always in the past, young professionals have come there and raised families, and it's been a thriving community. Now kids want urban centers and what have you, and you've got to help Flint sort of appeal to that young talent in much the way Grand Rapids has managed to do.
Yeah. All right. You know what? Let's take a look at some more headlines this week. All right, a couple of things caught my attention. The first one was that Melissa Gilbert, after all of the every little house on the prairie joke or, funny lead you could put in there, she's decided to drop out of the race in the 8th Congressional District. So Mike Bishop, he heaves a sigh of relief here, Nolan, and then what do the Democrats do?
Well, and that's the question. I'm not quite sure what the process is for replacing her after after the deadline, the filing deadline's passed. Will someone else have to gather the same amount of petitions?
No.
And if not, there's sort of a fairness issue in that, I think.
My understanding is that the party gets to replace her on the ballot. I don't know whether that's for the primary or for the general, but they will get to choose a candidate. And I think the challenge is, this is a district that is pretty heavily Republican to begin with. There was a shot, I think, with someone like Melissa Gilbert with her name recognition to try to take on someone like Mike Bishop, who has rather foolishly endorsed Donald Trump already. I mean, he's sort of given an opening there. But it's hard to imagine too many other Democrats in that area. I mean, it's not a place that elects a lot of Democrats.
Yeah, where's the Democratic bench? I mean, where are the up-and-coming or someone that could slide into that
it would
spot?
be in Lansing. I mean, because Ingham County is still there. But even there, I mean, they ran Barb Byram last time, and that didn't work out. So
Bishop's seen a good high name recognition. It'll be interesting to see who their choice is if they are indeed allowed to put somebody on the ballot.
Yeah, I think it's a little late in the game, though, too, for someone to be able to get traction. All right, let's take a look at what they're talking about in Lansing, the panhandling bill, that they should crack down on aggressive panhandling. I heard this and I was doing some reading on it, and then I say, do we already have ordinances or things in place to address issues like this? Do we need something extra?
I don't know. You walk a block or two in downtown Detroit and you can see what they're talking about. We leave the offices we're in. You can leave there and walk to Campus Martius and be hit up very aggressively 3 or 4 times.
How do you define very aggressively, Nolan? How do you define that?
Well, I mean, somebody who follows you, somebody who just continues to ask and ask and ask after you've said no. I think it makes those areas very uncomfortable for people walking.
So then are you supposed to alert the police at that point, and then the police officer is supposed to come and then take each side of the story? So that's what I'm trying to figure out how this actually works.
This is where the wheels sort of come off this kind of legislative effort. And let's remind people that the last time we tried to do this was struck down on constitutional grounds because it was singling out a certain kind of speech, asking for money for food or whatever, as opposed to, politicians go out and ask for money. All kinds of people ask for signatures and stuff on the street. There is no way to enforce this. It becomes a way to target the homeless, to get them out of areas where they need to be, frankly, because they can't get money or food other places. Now, I'm as annoyed as anyone else when somebody comes up and asks you for money and won't leave you alone. I think, the solution is dealing with why is that person on the street in the first place, as opposed to...
I mean, there's 2 different issues here. I mean, you have folks out there who are homeless and mentally ill, and we're not doing a very good job in this state of figuring out how to treat and house them. Yeah. And then you have professional panhandlers out there, and I think that's generally where the problem is.
It's going to be.
But so what do you
do? What they do? Yeah, what do you do in that circumstance?
And roust them.
Yeah, but and how much paperwork is that? It's going to be then what? Doing a citation, following up, and seeing where that person, if they paid it. Oh, and then there's going to be a fine on top of that.
It's terrible policy, and I don't know. It's not something that the cops even. I think
it's more suitable for a local ordinance than it is state legislation.
That's probably true too.
Yeah, so I think there's a little frustration on the state level that maybe they could have some other things to talk about. All right, I want to show you something that popped up on social media this week. Go ahead, take a look. Your DPT's finest dancing. Nolan do that once at a bar. That is the Detroit Police Department. They did this video. It's called the Running Man Challenge. It's a way to get out in the community a little bit. They put it up on social media. It went viral. There's been over 3 million views of it so far. And they challenge other police departments around the country to put up their own kind of video.
So when are we doing the MiWeek Running Man Challenge?
We could do the MiWeek Running Man Challenge. The best part was the video at the end. They dropped a donut, kind of like dropping a mic. You know, so it was fun to see. Did you see this earlier this week, Nolan? Who's got a crusty look on his face right now?
This is my first look at it.
How can this be the first time you've seen this? It's everywhere.
It's been everywhere.
You just waste a lot of time watching videos on social media.
He's too busy telling kids to get off his lawn, Stephen. That's
Get
what
off
he's
my lawn!
That's what he's doing. All right. Well, you know what? They have a tough job, and they stopped for a moment and had a little bit of fun. And we know that they have a lot of issues to deal with, especially a lot of crime that's been happening in the city of Detroit. We're going to be talking about that in the weeks to come. But it's nice to see some smiles on their face and some serious breakdancing moves that I want to see out of you next week up on Mackinac Island, Nolan.
At Horns.
I couldn't
At
do
Horns.
that unless I was in a car wreck. I couldn't get in those positions.
Thank goodness. That's going to do it for MiWeek. Again, just a reminder, we are hitting the road next week. We'll be up on Mackinac Island for the annual Mackinac Policy Conference. You can get your MiWeek fix 3 times next week. We'll have shows Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, 7:30 p.m. We're going to keep you up to date on all the biggest stories coming out of the conference. You can find out more info, MiWeek.org. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time on MiWeek. Take care of yourself.
Did you know? Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago. In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.